It was a rainy Thursday when I received the letter. I wasn't expecting anything in the mail. The envelope was plain, unmarked, with only my name written in elegant handwriting on the front. The paper felt oddly smooth, almost like something you would find in an antique store. I tore open the envelope, curious to see who it was from. Inside was a single sheet of parchment paper, folded neatly. There were no logos, no return address, just a message written in delicate, swirling ink. Dear Charles, I'm reaching out to you for a reason that is beyond the physical world. I have sensed an energy around you, an energy that requires guidance. Please accept my invitation to visit my home. There, I will show you the path forward and reveal what you need to know. Come at 8 p.m. tonight. I await your presence. Sincerely, Madame Serafina. I stared at the paper for a long time, the words swirling in my mind. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe from one of my friends messing around, but something about it felt real, uncomfortably so. I had always been the skeptical type, not someone who believed in psychics or fortune tellers. Ghosts, spirits, and the supernatural were all just stories to me. But this felt different. The energy the letter spoke of, it struck a nerve. I couldn't explain it, but I had this weird sense of curiosity creeping over me. I decided to go. What did I have to lose? The address Madame Serafina had provided led me to a remote part of town. The streets were unfamiliar, the houses grew sparse, and the trees loomed over the road like silent watchers. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 7:50 p.m. 10 minutes to spare. I slowed my car as I reached the location, looking for the number. And then I saw it. At the end of a narrow, winding path was a large, creepy house. It wasn't like the other houses I had passed. This one looked older, almost ancient, with crumbling bricks and ivy that had climbed its way up the sides. The windows were dark, almost as if the house were sleeping, waiting for something or someone. I felt a weird chill run down my spine as I pulled up to the front gate. The house seemed to be hidden from the world, like it didn't belong in this time. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The air around me felt thicker, heavier, almost like the rain itself was waiting. As I approached the front door, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wood. They looked ancient, something I hadn't seen before, with a kind of mystical aura around them. I hesitated for a moment, but the door opened before I could knock. Madame Serafina stood there, her figure slender and tall, almost floating in front of me. Her long, dark hair cascaded around her shoulders like a veil of shadows. She was dressed in a flowing black gown, the fabric seeming to move even though there was no wind. Her eyes were the most unsettling. They weren't the kind of eyes you could easily look into. There was a depth to them, like they were peering straight through me, seeing things that no one else could. Welcome. Her voice was soft, almost hypnotic, like it had a rhythm to it. She didn't ask my name or introduce herself. She simply gestured for me to enter. The interior of the house was just as strange as the exterior. It was dimly lit, the only light coming from flickering candles placed around the room. The walls were adorned with strange tapestries, some depicting symbols I couldn't recognize, others showing images that seemed to move if I stared too long. The air smelled of incense, sweet and heady, and something earthy, almost like damp soil. The atmosphere felt ancient, like this house had existed for hundreds of years, untouched by time. Madame Serafina led me through the rooms, her movements so graceful they almost seemed inhuman. I couldn't help but feel like I was being guided to some unknown destination. a path that had already been decided for me. We arrived in a small, dimly lit room, furnished only with a large, circular wooden table in the center, covered in a dark cloth. There were candles at every corner, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with books and objects I couldn't name. Madame Serafina took a seat at the table and gestured for me to sit across from her. I did as I was told, feeling an odd sense of anticipation building inside me. "So," she said, her voice low, almost soothing, "you're wondering why you've come here, why I've brought you." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. She didn't wait for me to speak. She simply looked at me with those unsettling eyes, as if she were reading me like a book. "You are here," she said softly, "because you are at a crossroads. Your past, your present, and your future are all tangled, waiting to be untangled. You are seeking answers. You want to know where to go next." I felt a shiver run down my spine. How did she know? She smiled as if reading my thoughts. "You may not believe in what I can do," she whispered, "but before the night is over, you will." I sat there, still stunned by the eeriness of the room and Madame Serafina's calm demeanor. Her presence seemed to fill the room, pushing aside any doubts I had. I was used to being in control, to thinking logically, but something about her, the air in this house, made me feel like I had stepped into another world entirely. She continued to stare at me with her unnerving eyes, but now there was a sense of comfort in her gaze. It was as if she could see deep inside me, beyond the layers I had built up over the years, and it scared me more than I was willing to admit. "You've been questioning things, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft and soothing. "Wondering what's next in your life, searching for answers you haven't been able to find." I nodded slowly. How could she know this? "I can help you," she said, leaning forward slightly, her hands folded in front of her. "But you must be open to what comes next. You must be willing to accept the truth." I wasn't sure what truth she was talking about, but I found myself intrigued. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice sounding hoarse, as though the words had been trapped inside me for too long. Madame Serafina didn't answer right away. She stood up, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost otherworldly. She walked over to one of the shelves and picked up a small wooden box, its surface intricately carved with symbols I couldn't make sense of. It was old, probably centuries old, and yet there was an undeniable energy about it. She opened the box and placed it in front of me. Inside were a set of tarot cards. Her fingers brushed over the cards as she spoke. "Tarot," she said, her voice low and almost reverent. "These cards are more than just tools for divination. They hold power, the power to connect the past, the present, and the future. They show us the path we must walk, even when we can't see it ourselves." I wasn't sure what to think. I'd read about tarot readings before, but always from a distance. I didn't believe in any of it, not really. It all seemed like vague, generic advice, something for people who wanted an answer, any answer, to make themselves feel better. But there was something about the way Madame Serafina spoke that made me doubt my skepticism. I felt a pull, a connection, something I couldn't quite explain. It was like she was speaking a truth I hadn't been able to see until now. She shuffled the cards in front of me, the sound of the edges brushing together echoing in the silence. Then, without a word, she laid out 3 cards on the table. Each card face down, their backs decorated with more strange symbols. "You'll see," she said. "I won't tell you what these cards say. You'll tell me." I looked at the cards, unsure of how to proceed. The air in the room felt thick, like the space between us had become charged with energy. I could feel the weight of her gaze, but I couldn't look away from the cards. Without thinking, I reached forward and flipped over the first card. It was the Tower. My breath caught. The Tower was a card known for destruction, upheaval, and unexpected change. It wasn't something you wanted to see. It wasn't something anyone wanted to deal with. Madame Seraphina didn't react. She simply waited for me to speak. I didn't know what to say. The Tower, it's about everything falling apart. Chaos. She nodded slowly. Yes, it's a card that signals the end of something in your life. A breaking down of old structures so something new can be built. The walls you've built, the way you've been living, are about to come down. You won't be able to control it. I swallowed. I didn't expect that. She smiled as if she knew exactly what I was feeling. No one ever expects it. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel during this reading, but it certainly wasn't this. Madame Seraphina's fingers moved to the second card, flipping it over slowly. It was the Hanged Man. I stared at it, unsure of what to make of it. The Hanged Man was a card that represented sacrifice, seeing things from a different perspective, letting go of old beliefs. "What does this one mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. "The Hanged Man," she said, her voice soft and steady, "is about letting go. Sometimes, in order to move forward, we must be willing to give up things we thought we needed. Your life is changing, but you're holding on to things that no longer serve you. If you want to move forward, you must release them." I felt a knot form in my chest. The more she spoke, the more I realized just how much of my life I had been clinging to. Habits, beliefs, even people that had held me back. I didn't know how to respond. Madame Seraphina reached for the final card, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of dread wash over me. What would the last card reveal? She flipped it over, revealing the Star. I stared at the card, almost relieved. The Star was a card of hope, guidance, and renewal. It signified a time of healing after hardship, a bright future waiting just around the corner. "Hope," Madame Seraphina said, her voice gentle, "is on the horizon. After the chaos, after the sacrifice, you will find what you've been looking for. But you must trust the process. Trust the universe." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by everything she had just revealed. The air felt heavy with meaning, as if the cards themselves were speaking truths I wasn't ready to hear. But they were right. Each card felt personal, like she had seen my life, my struggles, and my fears laid bare. I couldn't explain it, but for the first time, I felt as though I was seeing things I had always ignored. The psychic had revealed things that no one could have known. I wasn't a believer. But now, I was starting to wonder. I sat there, my mind racing, staring at the cards in front of me. The readings had been eerily accurate, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was caught in something I didn't fully understand. The room felt heavier now, the air thick with a strange, almost oppressive energy. Madame Seraphina sat across from me, her eyes studying me with a knowing calm. The way she looked at me, it was like she could see right into my soul, peeling back layers of my thoughts, my secrets, and even the ones I hadn't told myself. "You've lived a life full of hidden truths, haven't you?" she asked softly, her voice almost hypnotic. I blinked, startled by the question. "What do you mean?" Her gaze softened, but there was an intensity behind it that sent a chill down my spine. "Everyone hides something," she said. "A part of themselves they are afraid to confront. But you You've been running from it for far too long." I felt my heart pound in my chest, as if it was racing to get away from the uncomfortable truth. I had been avoiding things. I wasn't proud of it, but it was easier to ignore the past than to face it. I hesitated, unsure if I even wanted to engage with her. But the way she spoke, the weight of her words, it felt like I didn't have a choice. I've made mistakes. I've made choices that I regret. Her lips curled into a small, understanding smile, and she nodded. We all have, but regret isn't what holds us back. Fear of the unknown, fear of confronting the things we've buried, that's what paralyzes us. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. You have been running from something that needs to be faced. I swallowed, the words seeming too heavy for me to hold. I had always tried to keep my past in a small box, locked away so it wouldn't bleed into my present. But Madame Serafina's words were cutting through that box, bringing everything to the surface. She reached for the deck of cards again, shuffling them lightly in her hands. "It's time to let go of that fear," she said, her voice firm yet comforting. "Let me show you what the future holds, what you must do to find peace with yourself." I nodded numbly, unsure of what I was agreeing to. But the sensation of being pulled forward, of being guided by something greater than myself, was overwhelming. I felt like I was already on the brink of something, as if the cards and Madame Serafina held the key to unlocking whatever it was that had been tormenting me. She laid out another row of cards, each one face down. The tension in the room seemed to mount, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. "Let's see what the cards have to say about your future," she said as she flipped the first card over. It was the Wheel of Fortune. The card was vibrant, full of color and energy, depicting a large wheel with various symbols etched into it. It looked like it could move at any moment, spinning endlessly between good luck and bad. "This is the card of destiny, of fate," she explained, her voice quiet but certain. "You're standing at a crossroads in your life where the next steps you take will shape everything to come. The wheel spins and offers you a choice, whether to stay where you are or take the chance to change your path." I swallowed hard. The Wheel of Fortune wasn't just a card about luck, it was about change, about life cycles and the inevitability of certain things. It was about taking risks and stepping into the unknown. Madame Serafina glanced at me, watching my reaction carefully. "Are you ready for that change?" I nodded again, though uncertainty lingered in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't sure what change meant, but I could feel it. A pull, a sense that something deep inside me was being uncovered, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. She smiled faintly and flipped the next card. It was death. I flinched, the word itself sending a cold wave through me. But then I looked more closely at the image. The skeleton riding the horse was not a symbol of literal death, but transformation, renewal. "Don't be alarmed," she said gently, as if sensing my sudden discomfort. "This isn't about physical death. It's about the death of a part of your life, the end of an old cycle. Something that has been weighing you down for years must now be let go. It could be a belief, a relationship, a past version of yourself. Only through letting go of what no longer serves you can you create space for the new." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb her words. The card wasn't about endings. It was about new beginnings that came with the courage to shed the past. The last card she flipped was the Empress. This card was filled with warmth and life, depicting a woman surrounded by lush gardens, nurturing and full of vitality. This is the card of creation, of abundance and growth, Madame Serafina said. After the transformation, you will have the power to create the life you've always dreamed of. But you must first go through the process of shedding the old layers, facing your fears, and embracing what is to come. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. The cards had shown me a glimpse of my future, one where I could finally leave behind the parts of myself that were holding me back. It wasn't going to be easy, but the path forward was finally within my reach. All I had to do was embrace it. Madame Serafina looked at me, her eyes piercing and knowing. You came here seeking answers. What you do with them is now up to you. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly understood the weight of her guidance. The cards weren't just a reflection of the future. They were a way to guide me through the choices I had yet to make. I sat in stunned silence as the final card, the Empress, lay between us, its vibrant colors seeming to pulse with life. The words creation and growth echoed in my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper, darker, was lurking beneath the surface of this reading. Madame Serafina watched me carefully, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. She didn't speak right away, letting the weight of the cards settle around us. "Do you understand what they're telling you?" she asked softly, her voice a low hum that seemed to reverberate in the air. I nodded slowly, but a part of me was still unsure. The cards had laid out a clear path, a sequence of events, but there was something in the back of my mind that felt off, something that didn't sit right, something I wasn't seeing yet. "I think so," I replied quietly, my voice a little shaky. "I have to let go of the past, face what I've been avoiding, and then I can finally move forward." "That's correct," she said, her tone reassuring. But then she leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing slightly, and added, "But be careful. Not everything that waits in the past is meant to be left behind." I frowned, not entirely understanding what she meant. Before I could ask, she held up her hand, signaling for silence. "Let me show you something," she murmured, and her voice took on a slightly different tone, one that was more serious, more intense. "Close your eyes and let the visions come." I hesitated. The room felt suddenly still, and I wondered if this was part of her process, part of her gift. But I had already felt her power in the air. Her presence in the room was undeniable, as if something far beyond normal human understanding was at play here. Slowly, I closed my eyes. A deep breath filled my lungs. The moment my eyelids shut, the darkness behind my eyes began to shift. I could feel the energy in the room change, grow heavier. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't stop myself from being drawn into it. Suddenly, the darkness before me wasn't empty. It was filled with shadows, shapes moving in the periphery of my vision. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel their presence. A weight, something old, ancient even, pressing against my consciousness. And then I heard it. A soft voice, faint but growing louder. "You're not ready." I startled, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of the words. They weren't spoken aloud, but in my mind they felt like a warning, an omen. The shadows before me began to take form, and I was pulled deeper into the vision. I saw glimpses of places and faces, strangers, but not strangers. Faces I didn't recognize, yet I felt an unmistakable connection to them. They reached out to me, their hands stretching toward me, but I couldn't touch them. I felt a sudden surge of fear. It wasn't mine, it was theirs. The people I was seeing, they were trapped, caught in something far worse than anything I had ever imagined. Their faces twisted in agony, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways, and the shadows that clung to them seemed to feed on their suffering. The vision blurred and shifted. The faces faded, but I still felt their presence, lingering. There was one that stood out among them, a figure I didn't see clearly, but I could sense them watching me, waiting for me to understand. I could hear the voice again, clearer this time. "You are connected." I opened my eyes, gasping, my breath ragged. The room was suddenly too quiet, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead, the pulse in my throat. Madame Serafina was sitting across from me, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't moved, but there was something about her expression that made me realize she had been aware of everything I had just experienced. She had guided me into that vision. "What did you see?" she asked softly, her voice surprisingly gentle. I swallowed hard. The images were still fresh in my mind, vivid and unsettling. The shadows, the faces, and the figure that had been watching me. I felt exposed, as if the vision had peeled back something deep inside me that I wasn't ready to confront. "I saw people," I said, my voice shaking. Faces I didn't recognize, but I felt like I knew them. They were in pain, trapped in some kind of darkness, and there was a figure watching me. They said I was connected. Madame Serafina nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "The past is never truly gone," she said, her tone growing serious. "You may try to forget, to bury what you've seen, but it remains. It waits in the shadows where you least expect it. The people you saw, they are part of you, whether you recognize it or not. You're connected to a world beyond this one, to something old and powerful." I felt a wave of unease wash over me. This was far beyond what I had expected when I walked into her house. The psychic's power, the visions, the way she seemed to understand things about me that no one else could. It was all too much to take in. "And what does this mean for me?" I asked, barely able to keep the fear from creeping into my voice. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes piercing, and then, almost as if weighing something, she answered. "You are at a crossroads. You must decide whether to confront what you have seen or turn away. But know this, turning away is not a choice. The truth will find its way to you, no matter how much you try to ignore it." I felt the weight of her words in the air, thick and suffocating. There was no escaping what had just happened. I was deeply connected to something I couldn't understand, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it would follow me. I had walked into Madame Serafina's house as a skeptic, unsure and distant from the mystical world. But now, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I couldn't help but wonder, what would I see next? The weight of Madame Serafina's words hung in the air, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. My heart raced, my thoughts scattered. Everything about this experience, the cards, the visions, the way she seemed to know so much about me, felt too real, too connected. "You've seen what is hidden," she said softly, her voice gentle yet filled with an undeniable authority. "But there is more you need to understand." I couldn't bring myself to speak. I didn't know if I wanted to know more. The visions had been so unsettling, so unsettlingly real. The people I saw, those lost souls, felt so connected to me, as though they were part of my past, part of something I hadn't been able to acknowledge. But the figure in the shadows, the one that had been watching me, the truth felt like it was just beyond my reach. Madame Serafina must have sensed my hesitation because she leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "You came here searching for answers," she said, her voice low and hypnotic, "and you will find them. But first, you must be willing to hear them." I felt the room grow heavier with each word. My breath caught in my throat, but I nodded slowly, unsure if I was ready but needing to understand the depths of what was happening. She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "It's time to hear the truth." Her hand felt surprisingly warm on mine, and as she spoke, her words seemed to pierce through the layers of doubt and confusion swirling in my mind. "The figure you saw," she said, her voice filled with gravity, "is not someone who is waiting for you. They are someone you have already met, a connection that spans beyond this life." I blinked, unsure whether I heard her right. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, her eyes glinting with an unreadable knowing. "This figure is not a stranger, your name. You are already connected to them, and they are tied to the darkness you've been running from." I felt my pulse quicken. I didn't understand. How could this be possible? I had never met anyone who could fit the description of the figure in the vision. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the disjointed thoughts. Madame Serafina's next words hit me like a freight train. "The person you saw is someone you knew in a past life. Someone who has followed you, not out of malice, but out of necessity. You are bound to them, whether you remember it or not." I pulled my hand away from hers, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was saying. "A past life? I don't believe in—" "You don't have to believe," she interrupted, her tone sharp but not unkind. "The truth doesn't need your belief to exist. It just is." I tried to collect my thoughts, but the room seemed to spin. "But how is this possible?" My voice shook. How could I not remember something like that? Madame Serafina sat back in her chair, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Not all memories are meant to be remembered. Some things are too painful, too difficult to face in the present. But in time, they will surface, and you will understand the connection." I felt a strange unease flood my body as I looked at her. "What exactly do you mean by connection?" The psychic leaned forward once more, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "You and this person, this soul, are connected by unfinished business. They have been part of your past life, and they've followed you through many lifetimes, waiting for the moment when you could confront what was left behind." Her words didn't make sense. I felt my mind reel with confusion, but something deep inside me told me that she wasn't lying. The unsettling visions, the darkness I had seen, it was all too real, too vivid. There was truth to it, and now I was facing it. Madame Serafina continued, her voice steady and calm. "You have a choice now, your name. You can choose to continue running, hiding from the past, or you can face the truth, understand the connection, and embrace the change that is waiting for you." I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me. I had always believed I was in control of my life. I had always made my own choices, chosen my own path. But now I realized that my path was not entirely mine. This connection, this past life, was pulling me in a direction I couldn't fully understand. But as Madame Serafina's eyes locked onto mine, I felt something in me shift, something I couldn't ignore. It was like a magnetic force drawing me toward the truth. She stood up slowly, walking around the table toward me. The air in the room felt dense, as though we were both stepping into something much bigger than we could comprehend. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Are you ready to see what lies beyond this life?" to confront the shadows that have been following you, to face the truth of who you really are. I didn't know what was waiting for me. I didn't know if I could handle what I was about to see, but I had to know. I had to understand what had been hidden, why I kept feeling this strange pull, this connection to something or someone unseen. "I'm ready," I said, barely above a whisper. Madame Seraphina smiled, and the room seemed to grow even darker. The air hummed with energy, the atmosphere thickening around us, as if the very walls were waiting for something to unfold. "You're not just here for answers, your name," she said softly. "You're here because you've already made your choice, and that choice will shape everything to come." I felt a strange calm wash over me as the room around me seemed to fade. Whatever happened next, whatever truths would be revealed, I was ready. Ready to finally face what had been buried for so long. Ready to understand the connection, and to break free from the past that had been following me for so long. I don't remember what happened next. One moment, I was sitting in Madame Seraphina's room, her words echoing in my mind, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. The next, everything around me seemed to blur, as if time itself was unraveling. The walls of the room seemed to fade, the shadows stretching and shifting, and then nothing. I woke up in my car. The morning sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale glow across the horizon. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding as I tried to shake off the overwhelming sense of disorientation. Had it all been a dream? But as I looked around, I realized I was parked in front of the same old house, the same place where I'd gone last night. The windows were dark, the front door slightly ajar, as if inviting me back in. I sat there, staring at it, my mind trying to make sense of what had happened. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt too real, too alive. The images of the past life, the dark figure, and the connection that had been revealed to me. It was all still there, in my head, in my body, like a weight I couldn't escape. I finally took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The air was thick with a strange heaviness, and my feet felt as if they were dragging through wet sand. Each step felt unnatural, as if I was walking in someone else's footsteps, following a path that had already been laid out for me. I made my way to the front door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. The house was silent, too silent, and I could feel that eerie stillness creep over me again. Everything about this place was wrong. The way it felt, the way it seemed to watch me, like it had been waiting for my return. Inside, the house was just as I remembered, dark and cloaked in shadow. The floorboards creaked underfoot as I made my way down the narrow hallway toward the room where Madame Seraphina had been. But when I opened the door, I found it empty. There was no sign of her. No tarot cards, no incense burning, just the faint scent of something old and forgotten. I stepped inside, the room feeling colder than before. As I moved deeper into the room, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A mirror on the far wall. It was large, ornate, with swirling designs etched into its frame. The surface was completely clean, and I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. I stood there, staring into my own reflection. For a moment, I felt as though I could see into myself, as though the mirror wasn't just showing my physical appearance but the person I was becoming. The truth, the one I had resisted for so long, was standing there, staring back at me. And then, without warning, the reflection smiled. It wasn't a smile I made. It wasn't a smile anyone could make. The figure in the mirror, me, grinned in a way that twisted the very essence of who I was. The eyes weren't mine. The expression wasn't mine. I took a step back, heart hammering, but the figure in the mirror didn't move. It stayed frozen, locked in place, as if it were waiting for me to make the next move. I reached for the door to leave, but before I could touch it, I felt a sudden cold at the back of my neck. I turned, and there, standing just behind me, was the figure. The one I had seen in the vision, the one that had followed me through my past life. The dark figure I could never escape. It stood in the doorway just out of reach. Its face was a blur, like a dark, shifting shadow, but I could feel its presence. It wasn't just standing there. It was waiting, as if it had been there for years, watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. My breath hitched in my throat and I finally whispered, "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took a single step forward, and the air around me grew colder. The room itself seemed to close in, like the walls were pressing down on me, trapping me in this moment. But then, I heard Madame Serafina's voice, clear and sharp in my mind. "Remember your name, you are connected, and you will face your past no matter how much you run from it." The figure stepped closer. I felt it reaching for me, pulling me in, and I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was to come. Then I felt a hand, cold, like ice, rest on my shoulder. I snapped my eyes open, and the figure was gone. The room was empty again, and I was alone. I ran out of the house. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The weight of the truth pressed down on me, and I knew it would follow me forever. Whatever connection I had with that dark figure, whatever unfinished business was tied to my past, it was too late to walk away from it. As I drove away, I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone in the back seat. But when I looked again, there was no one there. And the road ahead, it was dark, and I had no idea where it would take me.